Okay, we are holding on 45B3 on the right-hand corner, right-hand column, the last part, Tanu Rabbanan Apas Shebi Ifsa. Okay, and all we're really doing is continuing on from where we were yesterday. And so remember, we would just continue to have we continue the conversation we had yesterday. So here we begin. Tanu Rabbanan. And again, it's 45B3. Here we go. Tanu Rabbanan. Hapas Shebe Ifsa. We had this case yesterday. A loaf of bread that begets moldy. Okay, it's getting moldy. So, and therefore, by the fact that it got moldy, it's no longer essentially a food with regard to people. It's unedible for people. But a dog, it's not so moldy that a dog wouldn't eat it. In other words, it's still good. If you threw it to the dog would eat it. This man the Omar says, that this is still subject to the tumah of food as long as it's the size of a shia kibeya, the size of a volume of an egg. Because this man the Omar says, we seem to hold like this with regard to tumah. You need a bigger shear than the simple shear kazayas. A shear kazayas, the volume of an olive is a smaller volume than the volume of an egg. And so for something to become tumah, or certainly for something actually to convey tumah, to have the ability to continue to pass on tumah, it certainly needs to, at the very least, be the size of a volume of an egg. So metamed tumas oichem kibeya is subject to the tumah of food up as long as it's the size of an egg's volume. That means even though it's no longer roi la'achilas adam, it's no longer at the point where it's edible for human beings, because it's still edible for an animal, for a dog, it still remains as a food. And since it remains as a food, it can become tameh. Nifrisa bat, benifrisa ima tameh bepesach. If it happens to be truma, and it's truma that got moldy, on Erev Pesach, you can burn it together with the tameh truma chametz. Rabbi Yosi, way back at the beginning of the Masechta, said there's an halacha that you have to be mishmeres truma. See, you have to watch the truma, meaning even though both have to be burnt on Erev Pesach because they're chametz, you still have to burn the tahar, the pure truma, separately from the tameh, the contaminated truma. Still, in this case, since the truma is moldy, even though regarding tumah, it still is labeled a foodstuff because the dog can still eat it. But since by people it's already unedible and it needs to be burnt, at that point already, even Rabbi Yosi agrees, there's no more halacha, there's no more rule that you have to continue to watch the holiness of the truma, and you're allowed to burn it together with the truma that is tameh. So the nifrasa ima tameh b'pesach. We are now on 45b4. Mishum Rav Nosson Amru. Rav Nosson says, no, once it becomes inedible for people, even if it could still be eaten by a dog, einoi metamel, because it loses its name, its label as food. It's no longer food. It's not metamel whatsoever. So, kiman ozlah hadetani. So then the Gemara says, okay, so now we have a following Mishnah. We have this Mishnah in Masechtas Taharis. Klal Amru b'Taharis. There's a general rule that we say regarding the laws of Taharis. Kol ha-miyuchad la'ochel adam. Anything that is miyuchad is reserved for achilas adam, for food, for eating of a human being. Tama achi yiposel melechel lekolen. It remains subject to becoming tameh, even if it gets moldy and starts purifying, as long as it can still be eaten by a dog. Keman deloy Rav Nosson. Obviously, this Mishnah is not Rav Nosson, because Rav Nosson says the moment a person can no longer eat a foodstuff, that's when it loses its name of food. And if it's no longer food, not a problem. What do you call it? It no longer can become tameh. Tanu Rabbana, says the Rabbana. Arivas Havdonim. This again, we're dealing with the trough again, a big vessel on which we put stuff in. But this is a tanners. Havdonim are the tanners. So these are the time, especially in the time of the Gemara, where you shechted a behemoth, you had the hide, known as the the hide of the behemoth, which was stripped of the behemoth, and then was tanned and turned into leather goods. Now, in this vessel, this trough, that you used to soak the skins in and worked out the skins and turning it into leather, in order to be able to make it use it, they would pour flour into these vessels. They would pour flour because flour was the kind of thing, it smoothed out the vessel, made it easier to go ahead and work with the skins. So the Gemara said, the Brisa says like this: Ayrube Adonim, in the case of a trough of towners, Shenosa l'soiche kemach toich shloshim yomim, in which one put flour in it within 3 days of Pesach. Zok the Gemara, chayiv levar, you got to go ahead and dispose of it, because we worry about that the flour became chametz, because obviously you also put water in there, and with 3 days to go, it might have become chametz, which means within 3 days, the flour retains its label as food, as a foodstuff. Koydem shloshim yomim, but if you put in the flour into this trough before 3 days before Pesach, eino chayev levair, because by that time we say it got disgusting with all the stuff that's inside this trough. After 3 days, it got mixed up into that stuff. It became too disgusting. People won't eat it, and if people won't eat it, it no longer is a foodstuff. Amar Rav Nosson, that you have a difference between 3 days to Pesach or before 3 days to Pesach. That's where you did not you put in the flour, but you did not put in the skins. You did not put in the skins yet. But if you did put in the skins, that even flour that was added within 3 days of Pesach, he's not mechuyev to what he called to dispose of the flour, because the fact that you put in the skins, obviously people are just not going to eat it. Okay, and if people are not going to eat it, it's no longer have a label of food. And in fact, Amarava halacha Rav Nosson, the halacha is like Rav Nosson, afilu yom echad, ba'afilu shah echad, even 1 day, even 1 hour. That means if you put in the flour and you stick in the oros, you stick in the skins, people get disgusted by it. It loses its name of food, and therefore it's no longer a food substance. It's no longer a food substance. I don't have to dispose of it on Pesach because it loses its power to be chametz. It could be chametz. I don't care. It's not food. We only worry about chametz with regard to food. It's not a food stuff anymore. Not my problem. Zok the Gemara. Now, our Mishnah then said the following words, cryptic words: V'chein le'inyan tumah, and also and likewise with regard to tumah, right? And the Mishnah continued: if the person objects to it, that it's there. In other words, if you remember, this was a case where you plugged something up with a piece of dough, you plugged up a crack, and the question only is now, for whatever reason, the vessel became tameh, and you need to go ahead and put it into a mikvah to be mitaret. You need to dunk it in the mikvah, in the waters of the mikvah, in order to purify it. The question is, if you're bothered by the fact that this piece of dough is there, that chaitzitz, it's chatzitza interposes, and therefore the tefillah into the mikvah doesn't work because something's blocking, because we say you're bothered by it, you, the person, are bothered by it. Therefore, it's not part of the vessel. It's something that of its own. In other words, the piece of dough is not considered as a patch on the vessel. It's considered as something that's simply there in its own volition. It's a piece of butzeik. It's a piece of dough on its own. And therefore, it's on its own. It gets in the way. The imroitz of the kaimon. But no, if you do want the piece of dough there because it's being used as a patch, you carry, but it's much like the trough itself, and it's not a problem. It's not considered a food stuff. It's considered a patch, and therefore it's part of the keli, it's part of the vessel, and therefore it's not a problem. It doesn't interpose. So it's up now. You'll notice I'm just going to point it out. You can already use the Mishnah used the words v'chein and also inyan tumah, which means that the Mishnah seems to be saying that tumah and matzah, what we were talking about, and chametz are the same. V'chein, we learned something that's very similar. Break the Gemara, mi dami. Where do you see that they're so similar? Hosam b'shiur Italia milsa. With regard to chametz, it wasn't totally in what you felt, how you felt, whether you liked it or you wanted it to be there or not wanted it to be there. It had to do on the size of the dough. If the dough is a kezayis, you had to get rid of it. If it wasn't the kezayis, if it wasn't a shia of an olive, you didn't have to get rid of it. We talked about this yesterday, right? That it had to do with the chayfetz. It had to do with the item. It had to do with the butzeik. It was totally in the butzeik. Is the butzeik a kezayis, the volume of an olive? It's got to go. If the butzeik is less than an olive size, it can stay. That's the first part. That's what was going on by chametz. Hachab regarding tumah, meaning that you have to the keli, the vessel became tummy, and I need to go ahead and put it in the mikvah, and whether this piece of dough is chaitzitz, interposes, or doesn't interpose, it's not totally in the chepsa in the item, it's totally in you, the human being, the gavra. How do you feel? Are you makbid? Are you bothered by this? Or are you not bothered by this? That's a huge difference. One is totally in the item, the chepsa. The other is totally in the gavra, in the person's feelings. How could the Mishnah then say v'chein le'inyan tumah, and so too for the inyan tumah, when in fact the comparison, in fact, is not a real good comparison? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, you're right. Let's switch the words of the Mishnah. Ema le'inyan hatumah einokein. But with regard to tumah, it's not like this. It's not tied to the size of the item, whether the item is a volume of an olive or not. It's tied to how you, the person, feel. Are you bothered by it or you're not bothered by it? Amalei Abaya, that's a great answer. Let's just change the words. The problem is that's not what it says in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, and so too with regard to tumah. You can't simply just change words to get out of your problem. And now we're on the daf. Mem Vav Amid Aleph, 46a1. V'chein le'inyan siruf tumah b'Pesach. Also with regard to combining for tumah during Pesach. So let's go. There's a machlekes Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi holds that something could become tamei itself, even if it's only a small amount. If a sheretz, if a creepy, crawly thing falls on it, and it's a piece of wood, food, even if it's less than a shir kazayas, even if it's less than the volume of an olive, it could become tamei. But Rashi says it certainly cannot convey tumah. It cannot pass on tumah to something else unless it's at least the shear of kibeya. It has to be the size of an egg's volume. Tosfos says, in fact, it can't even become tameh. It itself cannot become tameh unless it's already a shia kebeya. In order for it to become tameh, and in order for it to convey tumah, it has to be a shia of a kebeya, of the size of an egg's value. But regarding, here's the question: Le'inyan siruf tameh to tameh bepesach, combinations. So here's the question: if you had food stuff which was less than a shia kebeya, you had food over here that was less than the volume of an egg, and now you have this botzek, this dough. Does this and that combine together, like we had before, Issa mitzarf, Heta mitzarf le'Issa, that permitted combines with forbidden to bring it up to the shear? Do we say the same thing over here? Le'inyan tziruf tumah b'Pesach, regarding combining for tumah during Pesach, ubishar yemois hashana ikaplukta. During the rest of the year, there's a different distinction in the law. Hey chidami, what are we talking about? Kegai, for an example, the eina pachais, the ikka pachais mibeitza oichli. We got a case of where there's less than a shia kebeya, less than an egg's volume of food. V'gavu b'hai botzak, and then it touches this dough that's stuck in the trough. So this is what happened: food less than a shia kebeya, okay, less than the food that equaled less than the volume of an egg, falls into the trough, falls into the vessel, and touches the botzek that's being used as a patch. Then a sheretz falls in and is metama them. A sheretz, a creepy crawly thing, falls into the vessel and is metama this food. And then other food is then put into this vessel. A second set of food is put into this vessel. The question is, and it touches the food. The question is, did the food, the original food that fell in, which was less than an egg's volume, that now touched the botzek, touched the dough, with touching the dough, the food plus the dough equaled an egg's volume, that they became tameh. The question is, if another set of food falls in, does this have enough power to convey tameh? If I say that they do combine, the food that fell in, which was less than an egg's volume, combines with the dough that was in there to create a shia kebeya that now together is an egg's volume, well, then it could convey to something else. It can convey to something else. But if I do not say that they combine, then the food that fell in is less than of egg's volume, and therefore, even if according to Rashi, it could become tameh in itself when the sheretz falls in, it certainly cannot convey further because it's less than a shia kebeya, less than the volume of an egg, unless it can combine with the dough. I hope that makes sense. And it touches this botzek, and then it becomes tameh, and then other food falls in. The Pesach, with Pesach, the isuroi chashuv, since the dough, if it's chametz, has a chashivus, has a significance in that it is chametz and therefore has to be destroyed, it has to be removed, so it has a value of significance. We say, therefore, that essentially the dough is, even though it's a patch on the vessel, is not considered as part of the vessel, but is in fact considered to be significant in its own right. And since it's significant in its own right, it is mitzaref, it does combine with the food that fell in, which together created the size of an egg's volume, and therefore it could be mitama further. Mitzaref, and therefore says it does mitzaref to complete the shear of the egg's volume of food, the Shia Kebeya food, which allows it to be Matama further. But but the rest of the year, it's not totally in the item, in the chepsa, in the beltek, in the dough, it's totally in the owner's objection. If he is bothered by it, it is mitzaref. It is mitzaref because if he's bothered by it, in the rest of the year, it's no longer considered a patch of the vessel as part of the vessel, but it's considered as a thing in its own right because it interposes if I try to go ahead and bring it to the mikvah. And in Rotza Kiyuma, but if he really wants the patch to stay, he says, without the patch, I don't have a vessel. So then it ceases being a foodstuff. It ceases being looked at as a dough, and it's looked at as a patch. Hareyu Keruve, it's considered as part of the vessel itself. And therefore, if it becomes part of the vessel itself, when you bring it to the mikvah, does not interposes, and therefore we don't have a problem. Maskif lo rava. There's a problem. Does our Mishnah even talk about mitztarev? Our Mishnah, mi katonim mitztarev. Does our Mishnah use the words combines? Our Mishnah says interposes. So therefore, how could you go ahead and say that our Mishnah is talking about the idea of combining, of being mitztarev things with regard to Tumah b'Pesach? How do you say that? That it goes ahead and the food stuff that falls in combines with the butzek, it combines with the dough to create a shir kivayel regarding Tumah on Pesach. Elo Marava, this is what's going on in our Mishnah. V'chein lahalois tahara la'areva. We're talking about bringing tahara to this trout, to this vessel, to make it pure. Hey chidami, what are we talking about? Kigon, the itmei hach areva. That obviously this keli, which has the dough stuck to it, now becomes tameh. So it became tameh with the patch of dough in it. And now you need to go ahead and toivel it. You need to dunk it into the mikveh in order to make it tahar. The Pesach, the Isura chashuv. Since on Pesach the dough is significant, it's chashuv because of the Isur chametz. So therefore, I have to look at it as distinct from the vessel. Therefore, since it's chavetz, it does interpose, and it cannot be toiveled. The tumah cannot be removed by being toiveled in the mikvah, by dunking it into the mikvah, because it is an imposition. But the rest of the year, it's totally whether you, the owner, object. If you're bothered by it, it does interpose. But if he wants to go ahead, if he wants it to remain there as a patch, because without it he doesn't have a vessel, it's like the trout itself, and it's no longer a foodstuff, and you could toivel it, and it's not a problem. So that would answer our question, that the entire Mishnah is talking about chaitzitz. There's a difference about Pesach, because Pesach, it's telling in the item, because the item has a significance because of the chametz prohibition. Mashiach, the rest of the year, we don't look at the item, we look at you, the person. But frankly, Gemara, Maskebla Rapapa, that doesn't match up on our words. It doesn't say, and likewise with regard to Tahara, Hala Inyan Tumo Ketani. Our Mishnah said, V'chein Inyan Tuma. And so too with regard to the topic of Tumah. Not so too in regard to the time of Tahara, of purifying. It's about Tumah. So it's a beautiful answer you gave that we're talking about how do you purify, but that's not what our Mishnah is talking about. So why don't we answer that up? We're now on 46A2. Elo Amar Papa. So Elo Amar Papa. Here's the issue. And we're talking it so too likewise. How do we bring tumah, contamination, into this vessel, into the trout? Hey chidam, kigon, the noga sheretz bahai botzek. So I need to just remind everybody, a sheretz is one of the 8 creepy crawly things that the Torah says, amatama adam v'kelim, amatama, a person and utensils. Because a creepy crawly thing is a ava tumah, a father of tumah, a high level tumah. And an ava tumah that touches people or kelim turns the people of kelim into a rishon letumah, a first level tumah. And you need to remember that people and kelim, people and vessels, can only be metama to a first level. People and kelim cannot go any lower than a first level tumah. There's no such thing as a second level tumah to a vessel, or a second level tumah to a person, and so on and so forth. So here was the case. Kigon, the noga sheretz bahai botzek. This botzek, this dough, which was stuck inside this vessel as a patch, and a cookie crawly thing falls into the vessel and just touches the botzek, just touches the dough. Okay? So now we say like this. It just, give me a second. It touches the dough. And therefore, if the dough is part of the keli, if the dough is considered part of the vessel, then obviously the vessel itself becomes tameh. If the dough is now considered as part and parcel of the vessel, then it's not that the sheretz touched the botzek, it's not that the creepy crawly thing touched the dough. It means that the creepy crawly thing really touched the actual vessel, and therefore the vessel becomes a rishon letumah, because vessels could, when touched by an ava tumah, become a first level tameh. But if it's not a chelik of the vessel, if it's not considered as part and parcel of the vessel, but it's considered significant in its own right, if it's considered something separate from the vessel, well then, the fact that the sheretz touched the botzek, touched the dough, it means it was metama the dough, because the dough is not part of the vessel. And if it touches the dough, then the dough is a rishon l'tumah, becomes a first level tameh. But the dough is also touching the vessel. But the vessel, the dough, if the dough is a first, then the vessel which it's touching would become a second level, a sheni l'tumah. But vessels cannot become a second level tumah. There's no such thing as a keli, as a vessel becoming mitama, as a sheni l'tumah, as a second level tumah. It stops at a first level. So therefore, if we say that the botzek, the patch, is significant in itself and is not part of the vessel, so then the sheretz that touched the botzek turns the botzek into a first level. And the first level dough cannot be mitama the keli, and the keli remains tahar. So that's our question. So we say over here, we're saying over here, Bid Pesach, the Surah Chashuv, on Pesach, since the dough has the chametz prohibition, if it's the size of a kizayis, therefore it's significant, and therefore it's significant enough that it has value in itself and is not considered as considered as part of the vessel. Chaytzeitz, it goes ahead and it does interpose if you want to go ahead and toivel this keli. However, but it does not descend and make the keli tameh. It itself is tameh because it was touched by a sheretz, but it itself that touches the keli turns the keli into a sheni l'tumah. And there is no such thing. It's a second level tumah when it comes to a keli, because it's not part and parcel of the vessel itself. But b'shayim shana tikapei detalia, where it's talking about in the owner's objection, it's telling what the person feels. If a person is bothered by the dough being in there, then obviously it's not part of the vessel, and it does interpose. But of course, if it does interpose, it doesn't make. If the sheretz should touch the dough does not make the vessel tamei. But if he wants it to stay there, because he says without the patch, I don't have a vessel. So therefore, it becomes part of the vessel. It becomes part of the trough itself, and therefore it does not chaitzitz. It does not interpose because it's part of the vessel itself. But that would mean if the sheretz falls on it, it doesn't mean that the sheretz simply fell on the dough and not the vessel. Since the dough is part and parcel of the vessel, it means that the vessel now would be tamei on a first level tamei. Okay, I hope that all made sense. Here we go further. Zok the Mishnah. Botzek acherish. Dough that is deaf. Deaf dough. Okay, what does it mean for dough to be deaf? It means you look at it, and from the outside, you're not sure. You don't know if it's chametz. Did it rise enough or it didn't rise enough? It doesn't have any of the simonim, the signs that it may have been risen. In other words, it doesn't have any cracks in it. It didn't turn whitish. So I can't tell what's going on. Why is it called deaf? Because when you look at a deaf person from the outside, you can't tell whether they can hear or not hear. So it's the same idea. So that's why the Mishnah uses that language. Botzak acheresh, im yesh ki yaitza boy shehechmitz, if along with this loaf, you went ahead and you baked another loaf at the same time, and you see that the other loaf already has the signs of chametz. In other words, the other loaf has cracks in it, and it turns somewhat whitish. Hareza, also we then assume that this challah, this bread, even though it has no signs, it's also chametz, and it becomes forbidden as well on Pesach. So it says the Gemara, that's great. That's if you baked it with another challah. What's the story of Ein Sham Yaitzav Mahu? If you only baked it by itself, what's the law? Amar Rebbe Vo, Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, says Rabu in the name of Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Kedei sheyelech Adam min Migdal Nunya l'Tiberia. The deaf dough, this dough that we're uncertain of, if it's considered chametz, if enough time has passed that person can walk from Migdal Nunya to Tiberia. And how much is that? A mill. It's the size of walking a mill. And this is important because how long does it take to walk a mill? 18 minutes. And this is where we come to the 18 minutes that we say a matzah has to be baked within 18 minutes. It's not simply an arbitrary number. We all learned this. It has to be baked within 18 minutes. And in a hand matzah bakery, every 18 minutes they stop, they clean everything up, and then they start again. Every 18 minutes, there's a bell. This is the reason why. How do I know when a matzah is still a matzah and unleavened, as opposed to a matzah that now became leavened? The answer is, as long as it takes to walk from Migdal Nayone till Tiberia, which is a mill, 18 minutes. 18 minutes is the sign. If I don't have anything to compare it with, and I'm only dealing with itself, 18 minutes. If it takes longer than 18 minutes to bake, if it takes 19 minutes, bang, it's forbidden. So Frank, the Gemara of a name a mill, so we should say mill. Let's just say straight up, why are you telling me from Migdal in the Yarba to the area? Let's say it's mill. Okay. As the Gemara, the Lakish is coming to teach. The shiur of the mill, that the measurement of the mill is Migdal the Atiberia, from the Tower of the Yon until Tiberia. Amar Rababu, Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, in three different things over here. Okay? Amar legabel, uletfila, uletfilas yadayim, arba milim. 4 milim. What is this talking about? Everybody, please take a look in the Rashi, the first wide line on the bottom. Okay, the first wide line where it says legabel. You see the Rashi, the first wide line, the second to last word on the first wide line. This is what the case is. Hamegabel isa acherim b'sechar. Somebody needs the dough of other people for payment. This is what his job is. He walks around and needs the dough for the women to make the challah. The keli balabayis and the vessels of the balabayis who he's coming to do the work of kneading, tameim, happen to be tameh. Ad arba milim hitrichu chachamim, up to 4 milim, 18 times 4, 18 minutes times 4, the chachamim amatriach, the chachamim bother the person, leilech lemikvah, to go to a mikvah, letoivel kelav, to toivel the kelav. And the reason for this is to go to a mikvah, to toivel, to dunk the kelav, because they wanted that the bread, as much as possible, should be baked in a state of purity, not in a state of contamination. V'chein letfilah, and so too to praying, and this is important. Im mahalach adam b'derech, if a person is going on his way, ubo eis leloinu lispalel, and the time has arrived for him to go daven, okay? So you're on your way and you're driving along and it's time for mincha, and now you got to go pray. Im yesh beis haKnesses, if there's a shul lefanav, in front of you, the rachai arba milim, within 4 milim, 18 times 4. Okay, that means within a little over an hour. Haylech u'mispalel, you need to go to the shul and daven. Sham, there. V'lon sham, and over there you can go take a hotel. V'chein and etilas yadayim, so too for washing your hands. La'achilo, for eating. Even though this is washing your hands for eating is only rabbinical, l'netilas yadayim la'achilo, to wash your hands for eating, im osid l'mitzayim maya l'fanav dalaminim, if you can find water in front of you, up to 4 milim within an hour, you have to go there to wash your hands. So this is a very interesting story about the holy Baal Shem Tov. That the Baal Shem Tov once was walking in Mezhebish in the Ukraine, and he had no water. This is the legend. And he had no water. And he went ahead and he fell to the ground and he banged on the ground and said, Rabbi Shalai, the master of the world, I will not, please do not allow me to be over on the prohibition of not washing my hands, as the Rabbanan commanded us, as the rabbis commanded us. And he banged on the ground, and lo and behold, as the story goes, a creek of water, a stream of water opened up right then and there in Mezhebush, and he was able to go ahead and wash his hands. I say this story because I went to Mezhebush, and lo and behold, right dab in middle of this field, I'm not making this up, in middle of a field, surrounded by cows and it looks like a village. Mezhebush still looks like a village from 200 years ago. Right in the middle of this field, in the middle of nowhere, there is a pure creek. There's a pure stream flowing. The mikvah, as it's known, the mikvah of the holy Baal Shem Tov, of the Besh, last 10 years, they actually built up a log mikvah, beautiful log mikvah, That water is the most purest, coldest water you have ever been in. It makes the mikvah of the Ari HaKadosh, the mikvah of the Holy Ari up in Tzfas, it makes it as if it's heated. Everybody knows that Ari's mikvah in Eretz Yisrael is cold because it's a naturally flowing water. The water in the Ukraine in Mezhebush that supposedly the Baal Shem Tov banged on the ground and said, I need to go ahead and have Netilas Yadayim and not go ahead and break the words of the Rabbanon. It's in the middle of a field. There is no water anywhere around it. Mezhebush is not near any water thing. And there it is. And I tell you this, it is the most purest. It is so cold. I can't even begin to explain. I tell you, when I was toivel in that mikvah, I felt that all my Averis, all the fire of Gehenna for my Averis were frozen. That's how cold it was. Anyways, back to the what it called, back to the Gemara. Okay, Zap the Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, said Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, that in fact, that you said before that this was Amar Rabavu, Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish. In fact, it's Amar Ivu, Amar Reish Lakish. And not only is it Ivu, we're on, by the way, 46A3. Sorry, 46A3. And not only is it Ivu, but Abba Omaba. He didn't just say three things that you have to go for milim. He actually said four things, not just legabel, to need, to daven, and the tis time to wash your hands, but also fourth one. And what is that fourth thing? The chadaminaya ibud. And one of the four, the one that was not mentioned was the working of leather. The tznan, because we learned in a Mishnah. In Chulin, the Chulin she'ibud, and all of them, okay, for all of them, that means that it goes like this. Oyros, the skins, when you first skin the animal, the iris are still soft. It's still soft, which means that it's still edible. The skin is still edible at that point. Okay, and therefore bedin in halacha, it's still considered a food. And if it's considered a food, it could become tameh. Okay, but the kulon she'ibud, but all of them, if you work them into leather, oy shehilach behem kedei avoda, or you walk on them, you trot on them, okay, and you trot on them, tahirin, they become tar because they lose their shem achila, they lose their label as a food thing, and they become leather, and that doesn't become tameh midiraisa. Chutz, except may or ha'adam, the skin of a person. What that case is and all that, the mitzvah Shem, when we get to chulin, we'll be able to. Chutz may or ha'adam, the skin of a person. Because a person has always chashivas, a person that has chashivas, what do you call it, never loses its name. The kama kedei avoida, and how long is considered the time of leather working? Okay, like we said, even in leather, okay, kedei avoida, that you walk on a kedei avoida. Amar Rav Ivu, Amar Rav Yohanai, kedei hiluch arba milim, to go 4 mil. That's how long, that's what it is. So that's the fourth case. Amar Rav Yosef ben Rav Chanina, says Rav Yosef the son of Rav Chanina, Moishanu elu lefanav. This that Rav Shimon ben Lakish said, that you have to travel to find, to be matar the kalim, to purify the kalim, to daven, to wash your hands, or with regard, let's say, to this, to leather work losing its label as food, you have to go in front of you 4 mil. Avalach, but behind you, to reverse where you're going, afilu mil, even 18 minutes, you do not have to go backwards. Actually, we're not talking about the tannery because that doesn't matter, but we are talking about the other things. Amar Rav Acha umina, and from this that Rav Chanina just said, that what that Amar Rav Yossi, Amar Rav Chanina, that just said that you only go forward, not backwards. Milhu deina chayzer. That means 18 minutes in front of you, you do not, in behind you, you do not go. Hapachas menil chayzer. But if it's less than 18 minutes, you do go, you do back up, you reverse your field, and you go back. Zok the Mishnah weiter. Keitzad mafrishin challah betumah b'yontif. How are you mafresh challah? Reminding everybody, when you have a dough, you have to be mafresh challah min ha'isa. You have to separate challah from the isa. It's a biblical law that you have to separate out the challah and give it to the kohen. It belongs to the kohen. Okay, the challah doesn't belong to you. That's the part that you have to be mafresh, that you have to separate. Trumas challah, you have to separate out challah to give it to the kohen. Here's the problem. How do you mafresh challah of tumah, of tamadika botzek, of tamadika dough, beyond that means on Pesach? Because here's the problem. Challah that's tameh is not royal kodesh, which is holy, cannot be eaten if it's tameh. And that means even the kohen cannot eat it. And what has to be? It has to be burnt. But here's the problem. Therefore, since it's tameh, it was also to bake it on Pesach. Why? It's also to bake it on Yontif. Because the heter, the permission to bake on Yontif, is only l'tzayrech achila. You're allowed to bake on Yontif. You're allowed to bake on Yontif for your needs to eat, for your meal. But if you're not allowed to eat it, by definition, you're not allowed to bake it. You're only allowed to bake things that you need for Yontif. But if I'm not allowed to eat it because it's tameh, and challah that's tameh cannot be eaten by anybody, even the kohen, well then I wasn't allowed to bake the chametz. I'm not allowed to bake the chametz. Because on Yontif, mutar la'achila is only l'tzayrech achila, only for your needs of eating. But if you're not allowed to eat, it's like Shabbos and you're not allowed to bake. So how can you bake the challah? But here's the problem. If I don't bake the challah, what happens? It's going to continue to rise and become chametz. And then I'm going to have the problem of chametz on Pesach and be over and Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzah. You shall not see, you shall not find. So what am I going to do with this challah? If the challah is tameh, I can't eat it. The kohen can't eat it. If I can't eat it, I'm not allowed to bake it. Because you can only cook things, you can only bake things on Pesach, on Yontif, if you need to eat it for your eating needs on Yontif. But since I can't eat it, I don't eat it. And if I don't eat it, I'm not allowed to bake it. And if I'm not allowed to bake it, it's going to continue to rise. Because baking obviously retards the rising thing, like matzah. We bake the matzah and it stops rising. But if you don't bake it, right, it's going to continue to rise from the yeast that's in it. It's going to continue to rise, it's going to become chametz. And then I got a problem on chametz and Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzah, you shall not see, you shall not find. So what do? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, so it's the bottom two lines of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, lo sikra lo shem asher ta'afa. Do not call it challah until you bake it. In other words, I have my raw dough. Don't go ahead. If you remember, we learned this before, that challah doesn't simply just because you rip off a small piece and you put it to the side of the dough, that dough does not become the name of challah until you announce it. In fact, the women go ahead and make a bracha. Asher kedishonim mitzvah mitzvah to take challah min ha'isa, to remove challah from the isa, to take off challah from the dough. Until you label it challah, it does not become holy like challah. Same thing with truma and meiser and all the rest of them. You have to label it with your mouth. So says Rabbi Elazar, it's very simple. Bake it. Go ahead and bake it up. And only after you bake it, give it the name challah. So now you don't have a problem. You baked it. Right now it's not challah. And everybody else is allowed to eat tamadika food. So good, you're allowed to bake it. Now that you baked it, it will no longer rise. Now make it challah. Now label it as challah. Your problem is not, it's solved. Right? Ben Beseira says, Hitul b'tzanoim. We're now on 46A4. Ben Beseira, Tatul b'tzanoim. Put the challah in cold water. because cold water goes ahead and retards the leavening process, and therefore it won't become chametz. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, now we're on 46b1. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. This challah that you removed is not in the category of chametz, that if you have it there, you will be over on Bal Yeroeh, Bal Yemotze, that you shall not see and you shall not find. And Rashi explains right on top, because it doesn't belong to you. After you give it the name Chala, Vikara, and you call it Chala, Ksiv Shalach. By Chametz it says, you shall not find, you see it, and you shall not find it. To yours, what belongs to you, you shall not see. And this is not yours, because the moment you separate challah, it belongs to the kaihanim. But it doesn't belong to the kohen, because all you did was separate it and say it was challah. So now it belongs to the kahanim writ large, generally speaking. But it doesn't belong to any specific kohen, because you didn't give it over to any specific kohen, which is in your power to do. So you didn't give it over to any kohen, so it doesn't belong to any kohen. So it's in no man's land. So therefore, there's no problem about you or by Moshe. Just because it's in my house, it doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to me. It's not mine. Therefore, I don't have a problem. You shall not find it. You shall not see it. So, Elo mafrishu min nidcha erev. Rather, he separates the challah and sets it aside for the evening. In other words, till after Yom Tov on Challah Moed. And if it becomes chametz, so it becomes chametz. I don't care. It's not mine. No problems. So it says the Gemara, to this argument between Rabbi Eliezer, who says don't bake it and don't call it challah until after you bake it. And Rabbi Yehuda says, forget about it. You can separate it right away because it's no longer yours. So he says, Lema, the Gemara, let's say this machlokes Lema, the toivas hano kimefligi. If you don't mind, we're just going to go till 9 o'clock and we'll stop. Lema, the toivas hano kimefligi. Let's say they're arguing about the benefit of gratitude. Toivas hano is this remarkable thing. Toivas hano is the following. It's true that this challah doesn't belong to me. I grant you it belongs to the Kohanim, but I can choose which kohen to give it to. I can take it across the street to my neighbor, the kohen, and give him this challah. And he's going to be so happy. And he's going to tell me, thank you. And he's going to make me feel great. And the next time I need to borrow something from him, he might remember that I gave him the challah, and I'll be glad to give it to me. That benefit of gratitude has value. That has value. So Zakti Gemara Lema Tovis Hano Kimifligi. The Rabbi Eliezer Sova, Rabbi Eliezer holds Tovis Hano, the benefit of gratitude, Momine, is worth money. It has an equity value. It has a value. Because when I choose to give this challah to my neighbor, the kohen, he has gratitude. And gratitude, as we all know, has a value. Because if I want to go later to borrow something from him, he's going to give me something to borrow because he's going to remember how nice I was. But Rabbi Yeshua Sava, Toivas Hano, Einoi Mamoin, Toivas Hano is not money. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says, since Toivas Hano, gratitude is worth money, so even though I separate the challah and it no longer belongs to me, but because I still retain the power to give it to whichever kohen I want, that has monetary value. So there is some ownership to me. So if there is some ownership to me, I could be over on the prohibition, you shall not find, you shall not see. Unless I bake it and it doesn't become chametz. Rabbi Yeshua says, it's not worth anything. Tovis Hano, it's all very fine. Today you go ahead and you give it to him and he has gratitude. Tomorrow he's going to forget. Right? It's not my Moshe stick. It's not here. It's ethereal. So therefore, in that case, it has no monetary value. So therefore, the moment you separate the challah, even in its raw state, that it can still become chametz, it's no longer yours, it belongs to the Kohanim, there's no problems. Okay? That's up to Gemara Loi. The kula alma sabri tevis einay mamon. Everybody holds that tevis hano is not money. V'hacha b'hoyel kamafligi. Here we're arguing about the idea of sins. What's going on? But before we just get to this, this is saying tevis hano einay mamon. Everybody agrees that gratitude is not money. In fact, this is not so simple. In the case of ribis, everybody knows ribis, meaning lending money on interest. We're not allowed to lend somebody, another Jew, money on interest unless we write up today a heta iska. A heta of iska, we change the way it is. But minat Torah, straight up, Ruvain cannot lend money to Shimon with interest. So what happens if Ruvain lends money to Shimon? Charlie lends money to Jeff, lends him $100. And Jeff goes ahead and pays back Charlie, gives him back the $100. And then Jeff, being the nice guy from California, says to him, and he's not from New York, and he says to Charlie, thank you so much for lending me your money, lending me the $100. The Rosh, his son, the Torah brings down from his father the Rosh. The Rosh says it's usher, because that's ribis. That's interest. The fact that Jeff just said thank you to Charlie feels great. He gets the benefit of gratitude. And that has value. The Rambam, Maimonides, argues and says absolutely not. Jeff wants to be a nice guy. If in his heart he genuinely just wants to say thank you very much, Harishus Biyada, he's allowed to. So there's actually a machlokes rishonim in halacha regarding tevis hano. It is not so simple. Anyways, let's go further over here real quick because I just want to get to this little piece over here because tomorrow's daf is all about this. Loi, the kula alma sabri tevis hano einay mamon. Tevis hano is not money. V'hacha, what are they arguing about? V'hoyel kimifligi. Since, if you remember the last time we learned. We had this idea of the last thing. We had this idea of since there's a possibility that it could go on a different way. The Rabbi Eliezer Sova, Rabbi Eliezer holds, Amrin on Hoyel. We do say Hoyel. Ve'i boil ishtili Allah, because if he wanted to, he could have petitioned a Chacham to annul his designation of Challah. Why? Because remember what I said before. Challah, just because I separate it doesn't make challah. I have to declare that this is challah. Since it's by my mouth, it's the same thing as a neder, like a promise. And by a promise, as you know, we do it every year, Erev Rosh Hashanah, we do heta nedorim, right? We're mefer our nedorim, because what you do in your mouth, you're allowed to annul in front of the bezdin. He could do the same thing over here, and he could annul his designation. Since he could go ahead and annul his designation, since that possibility exists, and if he annuls it, it goes back into his property, and therefore it will be Ibn Matzah, says Rabbi Les, since we say Hoyel, since it's possible for him to do this, Memanahu, it remains his money with regard to the issue of Bal Yirah, Bal Yamatz, you shall not see, you shall not find, and therefore, unless it's baked, if it's in its raw state, it will become chametz and it will become a problem. Rabbi Yeshua Saba, Loi Amrinon Hoyel, we do not say Hoyel. I'm not going to worry about all this possible. He's not going to annul his declaration. We look at the case as it is currently. Currently, he went ahead and he separated out the challah. It belongs to the Kohanim. It doesn't belong to him. There's no Bal Yirah, Bal Yamatz. Very good. This is where we're stopping. Tomorrow, for the next daf and a half, this is what we're dealing with. Hoyel. Okay, we're going to repeat this Gemara tomorrow. This is the one we just did now, but that's what it is. Very good. Everybody have a great day. I'm sorry it took so long, but not easy stuff.